Rain poured heavily, drumming on the roof of the car like the beating of Lina's heart. She sat alone, gripping the steering wheel as though it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. Her breath came in short, uneven bursts, fogging the windshield in front of her. The world outside was blurred by tears that refused to stop flowing. In her hand, she clutched a photograph, its edges crumpled from her trembling fingers. The picture wasn't old. It showed Alex, her husband of 3 years, smiling with his arm wrapped around a woman Lina had never met before. A little girl stood between them, her small hands holding both of theirs. The caption at the bottom read, "Our family weekend getaway." Her chest tightened as her mind replayed memories she once thought were unshakable. Alex had promised her forever, on their wedding day, in every love note he left on the kitchen counter, and during those quiet nights when they whispered dreams about their future. How could those promises turn into this nightmare? The photograph felt like a slap in the face, a cruel reminder that the man she had trusted was living a life she knew nothing about. Lina wiped her tears quickly as the light from a passing car briefly illuminated the inside of her vehicle. Her eyes, swollen and red, darted back to the photograph. She had found it accidentally while organising their bedroom drawers. Hidden beneath a stack of work documents, it lay there like a time bomb waiting to detonate. At first, she had thought it was an old photo from Alex's past, maybe a distant cousin or a family friend. But the date printed on the back shattered that fragile assumption. It was taken just 3 months ago. Her mind spiraled into confusion, replaying every moment over the last few months that could have hinted at this betrayal. The sudden late-night business calls, the missed anniversaries, the business trips that seemed to stretch longer than they should have. Every time she asked Alex about his long hours, he brushed her off with that familiar smile, the one that used to make her feel safe. Now, that same smile haunted her. She had given him everything. Moved cities for him, given up her job to support his career. And now, all she had in return was a photograph of lies. Her fingers shook as she scrolled through the text messages she had taken pictures of on his hidden phone earlier that night. The woman in the photograph had messaged him often, sending pictures of their daughter, Mia, and telling him how much they both missed him. One message stood out among the rest. "I can't wait for you to come home. Mia's been asking when her daddy will be back." Her stomach turned, and she thought she might throw up. How long had this been going on? Had their entire marriage been a lie from the start? Or did Alex's double life begin somewhere along the way? She couldn't wrap her head around it. For 3 years, she had been the doting wife, planning their future, trusting him blindly while he slipped away to another family. Her fingers pressed against her temple as a pounding headache set in. She stared at the dashboard clock. 11:15 p.m. Alex would be home soon. He had texted her earlier saying he was stuck at the office working late on a project. She let out a bitter laugh, her throat tightening as she realised how easily she had believed him again. What kind of fool had she become? She used to be sharp, independent and strong, but love had dulled her instincts. The sound of her phone buzzing startled her. It was Alex. His contact picture, the same one she used to smile at, flashed on the screen. Her finger hovered over the answer button, but she didn't pick up. She wasn't ready to hear his lies again. Instead, she watched as the call ended and a message appeared. "Hey, love, heading home now, can't wait to see you." The words that once filled her with warmth now made her feel sick. The rain outside intensified, drowning out her sobs. She knew she had to confront him. She couldn't keep living like this, not with a secret so big it threatened to destroy her. But she also knew that once she opened this door, there was no going back. She thought of the times he had held her in his arms, and promised her that they would grow old together, that their love could survive anything. The irony of it all made her chest ache. Wiping her face with the sleeve of her coat, she forced herself to take a deep breath. Tonight, she would get answers. She would finally know whether Alex was the man she thought he was, or a stranger who had stolen years of her life. The photograph lay on the passenger seat, a silent witness to her heartbreak. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the quiet house, mixing with the faint hum of the rain tapping against the windows. Lina sat on the couch, her body stiff and her fingers gripping the photograph as though it were a lifeline. She turned off the lights, letting the dim glow of a nearby street lamp bleed through the curtains, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Lina?" Alex's voice cut through the silence, casual and warm, as if nothing in the world had changed. She heard him kick off his shoes by the door and place his keys on the table. The rustle of his jacket followed, the familiar sounds of her husband settling into their home, a routine she had once found comforting. Now, every sound made her skin crawl. He appeared in the doorway, his silhouette outlined by the faint light behind him. His hair was damp from the rain, and he carried his briefcase in one hand. When he saw her sitting there, his brow furrowed slightly. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" he asked, flipping on the light switch. The warm glow of the living room illuminated his face, and for a moment, Lina could see the man she had fallen in love with. Charming, caring, and familiar. But that image shattered as quickly as it had appeared. "I was waiting for you," she said, her voice steady but cold. Her fingers tightened around the photograph hidden in her lap. Alex raised an eyebrow, setting his briefcase down by the door. "Is everything okay? You're scaring me a little." She smiled faintly, a hollow expression that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine," she replied, though the heaviness in her chest suggested otherwise. "I just thought we could have a little talk." He walked over and sat down on the couch beside her, leaning in to kiss her on the cheek. She flinched slightly and he noticed. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern creeping into his tone. His hand reached for hers, but she pulled away. Lina took a breath, steadying herself. She wasn't ready for the explosion yet. She needed to see how long he would hold on to his lies before she tore them apart. "How was work?" she asked, forcing her voice to remain neutral. Alex shrugged. "Busy as always. We're closing that deal with the marketing firm, so I had to stay late. You know how it is." Lina nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on him. "Did you have dinner?" "Yeah, I grabbed something at the office," he replied, running a hand through his damp hair. "I would have called, but I didn't want to bother you." She almost laughed at the irony of it. He didn't want to bother her, but hiding an entire family was perfectly fine. "That's thoughtful of you," she murmured, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for the photograph. She hesitated for a moment, then finally held it up in front of him. "Did you have dinner with them too?" she asked, her voice sharp and cutting. Alex's expression changed instantly. His relaxed demeanor vanished and his face paled as he stared at the photograph in her hands. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The silence between them was suffocating, stretching on for what felt like hours. "Lina," he finally began, but she cut him off. "Don't," she snapped, her voice cracking as the weight of her emotions broke through. She stood up, clutching the photograph as she paced the room. "Don't lie to me, Alex. Not now. I want the truth." He stood slowly, his hands raised slightly as if he were trying to calm her down. "I can explain," he said softly, taking a cautious step toward her. She laughed bitterly, tears streaming down her face again. "Explain what? That you have a secret family you forgot to mention? That while I was planning our future, you were living a completely different life with them?" Her voice grew louder with each word, the anger and betrayal she had suppressed all evening now boiling to the surface. "It's not what you think," Alex pleaded, his voice desperate. "I never meant for you to find out like this. I was going to tell you." "When?" she shot back, her hands trembling. "When you were done playing house with them? When Mia was old enough to call you daddy in front of me? Or were you planning on keeping this secret forever, hoping I'd never notice?" Alex lowered his gaze, guilt etched across his face. He looked like he wanted to speak, but didn't know where to begin. Lina took a shaky breath, trying to regain control of her emotions. The man standing in front of her was a stranger. She couldn't even recognize him anymore. "How long, Alex?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How long have you been lying to me?" He hesitated before answering, and that hesitation spoke volumes. "Since the beginning," he admitted quietly. "Since before we got married." Lina's knees buckled and she collapsed onto the couch, the weight of his confession pressing down on her like a tidal wave. Her hands covered her face as sobs racked her body. Everything she had believed about their life together crumbled in that moment. Alex knelt in front of her, his hands gently resting on her knees. "I'm sorry, Lina," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to get out of it." She lowered her hands, her tear-streaked face filled with pain and anger. "You didn't know how to get out of it. You married me, Alex. You stood in front of me, in front of our families, and promised me forever. And the whole time, you were lying." "I love you," he said, his eyes pleading with hers. "I love you more than anything." Lina shook her head, her voice trembling. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have made me feel like I was the only one when I clearly wasn't." The room fell silent again, the only sound coming from the rain still tapping against the windows. Lina wiped her face, her mind racing with questions she didn't have the strength to ask. She didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that she had never seen it coming. Alex sat back on the floor, defeated, running his hands through his hair as he struggled to find the right words. But Lina wasn't interested in hearing excuses anymore. She had spent the last 3 years believing in a love that didn't exist the way she thought it did. She couldn't sit there and listen to him weave a web of apologies meant to make her doubt her own pain. "When did you see them last?" she asked suddenly, her voice cold and detached, as if she had shut off her emotions to protect herself. Alex hesitated again, and she knew the answer before he spoke. "Last weekend," he confessed. "I told you I had a work conference, but I went to see them instead." Her stomach churned at the thought of him packing a bag, kissing her goodbye, and driving off to another home. Another woman. Another life. The betrayal felt like a knife twisting deeper with every second. She stood up abruptly and turned her back to him, staring out the window as the rain continued to fall. The glass felt cool beneath her fingertips, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside her. "What do you even do when you're with them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you pretend you're a happy little family? Do you tell her you love her too?" "No," Alex said quickly, standing and moving toward her. "It's not like that, Lina. I'm not in love with Sarah. The only reason I'm there is for Mia. She's my daughter, and she deserves to have her father in her life." Lina laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "And what about me? What do I deserve, Alex? Because I'm pretty sure it's not being married to a man who sneaks off to play house with someone else." "You're right," he admitted, his voice breaking. "You deserve better. But I was scared, Lina. I was scared you wouldn't understand, that you'd leave me if you knew the truth." She turned around, tears streaming down her face again. "So you decided to lie instead? To live a double life and hope I'd never find out?" I didn't plan for it to happen like this, he said, stepping closer to her. I swear I thought I could handle it. I thought I could be a good husband to you and a good father to Mia without it affecting either of you. But it did, she said sharply, stepping back from him. It did affect me. Every time you left, every time you lied about where you were, it affected me. I just didn't know it because I trusted you. Her words hit him like a blow to the chest, and for the first time, she saw genuine pain in his eyes. But it wasn't enough to erase what he had done. She wiped her tears angrily and looked at him with the kind of clarity that only came when someone had been pushed to their breaking point. I can't do this, she said, her voice firm. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. Lina, please, he begged, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. She shook her head, her mind spinning with memories of the promises he had broken. It's too late, Alex. I don't even know who you are anymore. Don't say that, he whispered, his voice cracking. I'm still the man you fell in love with. No, she said softly, the finality of her words hanging in the air. The man I fell in love with wouldn't have done this. The room fell silent once more, the tension suffocating. Lina could see the desperation in Alex's eyes, but she couldn't bring herself to care. She had spent years building her life around him, and now that life was crumbling before her eyes. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the bedroom, leaving him standing there in the middle of the living room, drowning in the wreckage of his own lies. Lina closed the bedroom door behind her, leaning her back against it as she slid to the floor. The walls felt like they were closing in, trapping her with the weight of everything she had just heard. Her breaths came fast and shallow as her mind raced through memories that no longer felt like her own. She could still hear Alex's footsteps pacing in the living room, but she tuned them out. Right now, she needed space to think, to breathe. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, and she glanced at the screen. It was a text from her best friend, Cara. Hey, how's your night? Want to catch up tomorrow? Lina stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, but she didn't know what to say. How could she explain that her entire world had just shattered? Instead, she stood up and walked to the bed, collapsing onto it face first. The sheets smelled like Alex, his cologne, his warmth, the scent that used to bring her comfort. Now, it made her nauseous. She rolled onto her back, staring at the ceiling as tears slipped silently down her temples. How had this become her reality? Just yesterday, she had been planning their weekend getaway, searching for cozy cabins online while imagining them sipping hot cocoa by a fireplace. Now, she couldn't even look at him without feeling betrayed. Her mind replayed his words. I was scared you wouldn't understand. She scoffed, the bitterness clawing at her throat. He was right. She didn't understand. How could someone who claimed to love her think that lying for years was better than being honest? Did he ever really love her? Or was she just the backup plan in a life he couldn't fully commit to? A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. She ignored it, wiping her face as the tears kept coming. But Alex wasn't giving up. Lina, his voice called softly from the other side. Please, can we talk? She squeezed her eyes shut, wishing he would just disappear. But when the knocking continued, she sat up and wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. With a deep breath, she opened the door, her eyes meeting his. He looked broken, dishevelled hair, red, rimmed eyes, and guilt written all over his face. For a moment, she felt a pang of sympathy, but she quickly buried it. She couldn't afford to feel sorry for him. Not now. What do you want, Alex? She asked, her voice flat. I need you to understand, he said, stepping closer. Please, just give me a chance to explain everything. I think you've explained enough, she replied, crossing her arms over her chest. You've been lying to me since the day we got married. What else is there to say? I didn't do this to hurt you, he insisted, his voice cracking. I was trying to protect you. She let out a bitter laugh. Protect me from what? The truth. Because that's exactly what I needed. I didn't need you to protect me. I needed you to be honest. Alex ran a hand down his face, frustration and regret evident in his expression. I know I messed up. I know I broke your trust. But I never stopped loving you, Lina. Everything I've done, every mistake I made, it wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I cared too much. She shook her head, her eyes glistening with fresh tears. Love isn't supposed to feel like this, she whispered. It's not supposed to be built on lies and secrets. I thought you were my forever, Alex. I thought we had something real. We do, he said, stepping forward and gently cupping her face. For a moment, she let him, closing her eyes as his touch brought back memories of the good times. Their first kiss, the night he proposed, the way he held her after she got her first big job promotion. But those memories were tainted now, covered in the shadow of what he had done. She pulled away, taking a step back. I don't know if I can forgive you, she admitted, her voice trembling. I don't know if I even want to. The words hung between them like a heavy weight, and Alex's shoulders sagged. I'll do whatever it takes, he said softly. Just tell me what you need. I'll fix it. Lina shook her head, a small bitter smile forming on her lips. You can't fix this, Alex. You can't undo the years of lies. You can't make me unsee that photograph or forget the way you made me feel tonight. But I can try, he whispered, his voice desperate. Please don't give up on us. Her heart ached at his words, but she knew deep down that this wasn't something she could easily move past. Trust was like glass. Once shattered, it could never be the same. And while part of her wanted to believe they could rebuild, the other part of her knew that some cracks were too deep to repair. I need time, she said finally, her voice barely audible. I can't make this decision right now. Alex nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. Take all the time you need. I'll wait for you, Lina, no matter how long it takes. She watched him leave, her body frozen in place as the door closed behind him. The silence that followed was deafening, but for the first time that night, she felt a sliver of relief. She didn't know what the future held, but at least for now she had control over one thing, her decision. Collapsing back onto the bed, she let the tears fall freely, knowing that the road ahead would be long and painful. But for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting soft rays across the bedroom floor. Lina stirred awake, her eyes puffy and sore from crying. For a brief second, she forgot about the nightmare her life had become, but reality came crashing down the moment she turned and saw the empty space beside her. The bed felt cold, and the emptiness was a cruel reminder that nothing would ever be the same. She sat up slowly, her body aching as though she had been physically fighting all night. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand again, and she groggily reached for it. Another message from Kara. Are you okay? You didn't answer last night. Call me if you need anything. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. She wanted to tell Kara everything, to let out the storm raging inside her, but she couldn't find the words. Instead, she put the phone down and got out of bed. The hardwood floor felt cool under her bare feet as she made her way to the kitchen, hoping a cup of coffee would at least make her feel human. The house was eerily quiet. No sound of Alex whistling in the kitchen, no smell of breakfast being made. It was like living with a ghost. She found a note on the counter, scrawled in Alex's familiar handwriting. I didn't want to wake you. I'll be at the office all day. Take care of yourself. Her eyes lingered on the note for a moment before she crumpled it in her fist and threw it into the trash. She didn't need another reminder of his presence or his half-hearted attempts to make things right. What she needed was clarity. As she sipped her coffee, her mind wandered back to the photograph and the little girl in it. Mia, the child who wasn't at fault but had become a symbol of Alex's betrayal. What was she like? Did she have Alex's eyes, his smile? Did she know about Lina, or had she grown up believing her parents were still together? The questions wouldn't stop. They gnawed at her, making her chest feel tight. Before she knew it, her fingers were typing the address she had memorized from the night before into her phone's GPS. She stared at the screen, her heart pounding as it calculated the route. It would take less than an hour to get there. The rational part of her screamed that it was a bad idea, that nothing good would come from seeing them. But the part of her that needed answers, the part that couldn't rest until she understood everything, won. Before she could second-guess herself, Lina grabbed her keys and slipped on a jacket. The air outside was crisp, the morning breeze biting against her skin as she climbed into her car. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she backed out of the driveway and followed the GPS instructions. Her mind raced the entire time, replaying the confrontation from the night before, imagining what she would find when she arrived. Would Sarah be there? Would Alex be playing the role of a perfect father, while Lina was left in the shadows of his deception? The suburban neighborhood came into view, peaceful and pristine with its neatly trimmed lawns and picket fences. Lina felt out of place as she slowly drove past the houses, searching for the one from the photograph. Her heart thumped louder with each passing second, and when she finally spotted it, her breath hitched. There it was, the same house she had seen Alex walk into last night. She parked a few houses down and killed the engine, her fingers trembling as she clutched the steering wheel. For a moment, she debated turning around and leaving, but before she could convince herself, the front door of the house opened and her breath caught in her throat. Sarah stepped out, her long brown hair falling over her shoulders as she carried a small bag in one hand. She looked exactly like she had in the photograph, effortlessly beautiful, with an air of calm that made Lina feel even more out of place. Behind her, a little girl darted outside, laughing as she chased a butterfly across the lawn. Mia. Lina's throat tightened as she watched them. The little girl was a perfect blend of innocence and joy, with curly brown hair and bright eyes that sparkled with life. She wore a pink dress and rain boots, stomping in a puddle as she giggled. It was a scene that should have been heartwarming, but for Lina, it was suffocating. This was the life Alex had built without her, the life she had never been a part of. She pressed her hand against her chest, trying to steady her breathing as tears welled up in her eyes. This was too much. She had thought seeing them would give her the answers she needed, but all it had done was twist the knife deeper. Her mind replayed the way Alex had begged her to understand, to give him another chance. But how could she, when this was the truth he had hidden from her? Just as she was about to start the car and drive away, Mia looked up, her gaze locking onto Lina's car. For a split second, the little girl froze, her curious eyes studying the stranger parked down the street. Lina panicked, fumbling with the keys as she tried to turn the ignition. But before she could drive off, Sarah's gaze followed Mia's, and her eyes landed on Lina. The recognition was instant. Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to realization, and she took a cautious step forward. Lina's heart raced as she turned the key, the engine roaring to life just as Sarah began walking toward her. Without thinking, Lina slammed her foot on the gas and sped down the street, tears blurring her vision. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't stay there. She couldn't face Sarah. She couldn't face the reality of what her life had become. As the neighborhood disappeared in her rearview mirror, Lina pulled over to the side of the road, sobbing uncontrollably. The The weight of everything crashed down on her, suffocating her as she gasped for air. She had wanted answers, but instead she had found more pain. Her phone buzzed in her lap, and she saw Alex's name flashing on the screen. She ignored it, throwing the phone onto the passenger seat as she buried her face in her hands. She couldn't talk to him. Not now. Not after seeing the life he had been living without her. The truth wasn't supposed to hurt like this. But it did, and she wasn't sure if she could ever recover. Lina sat in her car, the distant hum of passing traffic, the only sound filling the void. Her sobs had subsided into quiet sniffles, but the weight of the morning clung to her like a heavy fog. Her fingers brushed against her phone on the passenger seat, but she couldn't bring herself to pick it up. She knew Alex would call again, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain, but the thought of hearing his voice made her feel like she was drowning all over again. Wiping her face with the sleeve of her jacket, she started the engine and drove aimlessly through the streets. Her mind was a battlefield, torn between anger, heartbreak, and the haunting image of Mia's innocent face. The little girl had no idea how her existence had shattered Lina's world, and that thought only made the pain worse. After what felt like hours, Lina found herself pulling into the parking lot of a small coffee shop she used to visit before her life had become so tangled. The bell above the door jingled softly as she entered, and the warm scent of freshly brewed coffee wrapped around her like a temporary balm. She ordered a black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and sat at a table by the window, staring blankly outside as she tried to piece herself back together. The silence of the cafe allowed her thoughts to run wild. She replayed everything Alex had said the night before, dissecting his words for any sign of the man she had fallen in love with. He had admitted his mistakes, begged for forgiveness, promised he could fix things. But could he? And more importantly, could she? Was love enough to repair the damage caused by years of lies? Her phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't Alex. It was Cara. Lina hesitated before answering, but the moment she heard her best friend's voice, the floodgates opened again. "Lina, what's wrong?" Cara's concerned tone broke through the wall Lina had tried to build around herself. "I don't even know where to start," Lina whispered, her voice cracking. "Everything's a mess." "Tell me what happened," Cara urged gently. "I'm here." Lina took a shaky breath, her fingers trembling around the warm coffee cup. "Alex has a daughter, a family. He's been lying to me for years, Cara. I found out last night." There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if Cara needed a moment to process the weight of what Lina had just said. "Oh my God," she finally whispered. "Lina, I'm so sorry. How did you find out?" Lina recounted everything. The photograph, the hidden phone, the confrontation, and the morning drive to see them. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down her face again, but she felt a small sense of relief from finally letting it out. "I don't know what to do," Lina admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Part of me wants to leave, but another part of me, I don't know. I loved him, Cara, I still do, but I don't know if that's enough." "It's okay to feel that way," Cara said softly. "You don't have to make a decision right now. You've been through a lot, and you need time to process it. But whatever you decide, you don't have to do it alone. I'll be here, no matter what." Lina closed her eyes, letting Cara's words sink in. She had spent the last 24 hours feeling like she was drowning, but for the first time she felt like someone had thrown her a lifeline. "Thank you," she whispered. "I needed to hear that." "Anytime," Cara replied. "Do you want me to come over? We can binge terrible movies, eat junk food, and forget about men for a while." Lina chuckled softly through her tears. "Maybe later. I just need a little more time to be alone." "I understand. Just promise me you won't shut me out, okay?" I promise, Lina said, her voice a little stronger now. I'll call you soon. After hanging up, Lina sat in silence for a few moments, sipping her coffee as she watched the world outside. People passed by, laughing, chatting, living their normal lives. She envied them, wished she could rewind time and go back to the version of herself who believed in forever. But that version of her was gone now, replaced by someone who'd seen the truth and couldn't unsee it. Her phone buzzed again, and this time she hesitated before checking the screen. Another message from Alex. Lina, I know you're hurting, but please let me explain everything. I don't want to lose you. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she didn't know what to say. How could she respond when she didn't even know what she felt anymore? Instead, she locked the phone and slipped it into her bag, deciding to give herself the time she needed. As she left the cafe, the cold air nipped at her skin, but she welcomed it. It was a reminder that she was still alive, still capable of moving forward even when everything felt broken. She didn't know what her next step would be, but for now, that was okay. The day passed in a blur, with Lina wandering through streets she barely recognized, her mind clouded with memories and questions. As dusk settled, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, she found herself back home, standing in front of the door with hesitation weighing her down. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked it, stepping inside to the faint smell of the vanilla candle she had lit last night, before her world had shattered. The silence inside the house was deafening. Alex wasn't home yet, which came as a relief. She dropped her bag on the floor and made her way to the bedroom, collapsing onto the bed as exhaustion finally caught up with her. For a few moments, she lay there, staring at the ceiling, wishing she could rewind time to a version of herself who didn't know about Mia or Sarah. Just as she was about to drift into a restless nap, a knock at the front door startled her. Lina sat up, her heart racing. She wasn't expecting anyone, and Alex wouldn't have knocked. Cautiously, she walked to the door and peeked through the peephole. Her breath hitched when she saw who it was. Sarah. Her mind froze and panic surged through her veins. What was she doing here? How did she even find her address? Lina's first instinct was to pretend she wasn't home, but Sarah knocked again, a little louder this time. Lina, her voice called softly through the door. I know you're in there. I just want to talk. Lina's hand trembled as she unlocked the door and opened it slightly, peering out at the woman she had spent the entire day thinking about. Sarah stood there with a calm expression, her hair neatly tied back, and a soft look in her eyes that made it difficult for Lina to hate her, though she wanted to. What are you doing here? Lina asked, her voice barely steady. I saw you earlier today, Sarah admitted, her gaze dropping briefly. You were parked outside the house. I figured you'd want answers. Lina swallowed hard, gripping the door tighter. I don't know if I want to hear them. Sarah nodded, a flicker of understanding passing over her face. I get it, but if you change your mind, I'm staying at the coffee shop down the street for a bit. You can come find me. She turned to leave, but something inside Lina snapped. Maybe it was the frustration, the confusion, or the overwhelming need for closure, but before she could stop herself, she opened the door wider. Wait! Sarah stopped and turned around, hope flickering in her eyes. Lina stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. Sarah entered cautiously, her eyes scanning the house as though it held secrets she wasn't supposed to see. They both walked to the living room and sat across from each other, the tension in the air thick enough to suffocate them. Neither spoke for a moment, the silence broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside. Lina stared at Sarah, studying her closely, the way her fingers fidgeted nervously in her lap, the way her lips pressed into a thin line as if she were unsure of what to say. Why are you here? Lina finally asked, her voice soft but firm. What do you want from me? Sarah exhaled slowly, her eyes meeting Lina's. I wanted to tell you the truth, not the version Alex might have given you, the real truth. Lina leaned back against the couch, crossing her arms defensively. Then, start talking. Sarah hesitated for a moment before nodding. Alex and I were married for 6 years. Things were good in the beginning, but we weren't in love. I think we both knew it, but when I got pregnant with Mia, we felt like we had to stay together. We tried to make it work, but it only made things worse. Eventually, we separated. Lina's jaw tightened, her stomach churning as she listened. If you're separated, why is he still coming back to you? Sarah looked down at her hands, wringing them together. Because of Mia. She doesn't know we're separated. Alex never wanted her to feel like she was missing a parent. So, when she asks for him, he comes. We agreed to keep things civil for her sake. Lina scoffed, bitterness creeping into her voice. So, he just conveniently forgot to tell me that he had a daughter and a second life with you. Sarah flinched at the accusation, but she didn't argue. I didn't know about you at first, she admitted. He kept you a secret, just like he kept us a secret from you. But a few months ago, I found out. Lina's breath hitched. You knew about me, and you didn't tell me? I wanted to, Sarah said quickly. But Alex begged me not to. He said he'd tell you when the time was right. I believed him because I thought he was trying to do the right thing. Lina's eyes stung with fresh tears, but she blinked them away. He's been lying to both of us. I know, Sarah whispered, guilt clouding her voice. And I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't come here to make excuses for him. I came here because I know what it's like to be blindsided by him. I thought you deserved the truth. Lina's gaze softened, though the anger in her chest still burned. Does Mia know who I am? Sarah shook her head. She just thinks her dad has work trips. She doesn't know anything about you. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lina tried to process everything, but her mind felt like it was spinning out of control. She had spent so long viewing Sarah as the enemy, the woman who had stolen Alex's time and attention. But now she realized they were both victims of the same man's deceit. I don't know what to do, Lina admitted, her voice barely audible. Sarah reached across the table and gently placed her hand on Lina's. You don't have to decide anything right now. Just know that whatever happens, you're not alone in this. Lina stared at their hands, the warmth of Sarah's touch unexpectedly comforting. For the first time since this nightmare began, she didn't feel completely isolated. Thank you, she whispered, her voice cracking. Sarah offered a small, sad smile. Take care of yourself, Lina. You deserve that much. With that, she stood up and walked toward the door. Lina didn't stop her this time. As the door closed behind her, the house fell silent once more, but this time the silence didn't feel as suffocating. Lina sat there for a long time, replaying the conversation in her head. She still didn't have all the answers, but she had something she hadn't felt in days, a sliver of clarity. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to help her figure out what to do next. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting golden lines across the bedroom walls. Lina woke up feeling emotionally drained, but strangely lighter. The conversation with Sarah lingered in her mind like a haunting echo, one she couldn't ignore, but one that no longer suffocated her. She didn't know if it was the shared pain or the realization that she wasn't alone, but a small part of her felt steady, fragile, but steady. She dragged herself out of bed and shuffled to the kitchen. The house was silent, just like it had been the night before. Alex hadn't come home. Whether that was intentional or a result of her shutting him out, she didn't know. She poured herself a cup of coffee, letting the warmth spread through her hands as she stared out the kitchen window. The leaves on the trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, their peaceful dance mocking the storm in her heart. Her phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up with another message from Alex. "I'm sorry for everything, Lina. Please, can we meet tonight? Just one last time. And if you still want me to leave, I will." Lina stared at the message, her fingers trembling slightly. She wasn't sure if she could face him again, but the truth was she needed closure. She needed to hear the full story from his lips, even if it hurt. She needed to know whether the man she had loved still existed, or if he was just another lie she had been forced to uncover. After a long pause, she typed back, "Come home tonight. 8 p.m. She set the phone down, her heart pounding in her chest. The thought of seeing him again filled her with dread, but at the same time, she knew this was a conversation that had to happen. She couldn't keep living in limbo, torn between the past and the unknown future. As the day passed, Lina kept herself busy cleaning the house, rearranging shelves, and doing anything to keep her mind from spiraling. But every time she paused, her thoughts returned to the confrontation ahead. Would he finally tell her the truth, or would he feed her another string of half-truths meant to placate her? By the time 8 p.m. rolled around, Lina was seated on the couch, her fingers nervously tapping against her lap. The ticking clock on the wall felt louder than it had ever been, each second stretching endlessly. She heard the soft sound of keys turning in the front door, and her breath hitched. Moments later, Alex stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. He looked tired, worn down, as if he hadn't slept in days. His eyes met hers, filled with guilt and longing. But Lina didn't move. She stayed where she was, forcing herself to remain composed. "Hi," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sit down," she replied, motioning to the chair across from her. He obeyed, setting his keys on the table before taking a seat. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Alex fidgeted with his hands, his eyes flickering to hers before darting away again. Finally, Lina spoke. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice firm. "No lies, no half-truths, just the truth." Alex exhaled, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of the world had been pressing down on him. "I met Sarah in college," he began. "We weren't in love, but we were good together. When she got pregnant, we thought marriage was the right thing to do. We tried to make it work, but we were never happy. We fought more than we laughed, and by the time Mia was born, we were already falling apart." Lina's fingers tightened into fists, but she remained silent, letting him continue. "When we finally separated, I thought it would be easy to move on. I met you, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. You made me happy, Lina. You made me believe that love didn't have to be painful." Her throat tightened at his words, but she pushed down the emotion threatening to surface. "Then, why didn't you tell me about them?" "I was scared," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I didn't want you to see me as damaged or burdened. I thought if I could keep that part of my life separate, we could have something perfect. But then Mia started asking for me, and Sarah didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know how to say no to my daughter." Lina's breath hitched, tears pooling in her eyes. "You could have told me. I would have understood." "I know," he said, his head falling into his hands. "I know that now, but back then I was stupid. I thought I could handle it on my own." The room fell silent again, Alex's confession hanging in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Lina wiped a tear from her cheek, her heart aching with both anger and sorrow. "What do you want from me, Alex?" she whispered. "Do you want me to forgive you and pretend none of this ever happened?" "No," he said quickly, lifting his head to meet her gaze. "I don't want you to pretend. I just want a chance to prove that I can be the man you deserve. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll go to therapy. I'll be honest from now on. Just don't shut me out, Lina." Her chest tightened at the desperation in his voice, but she couldn't ignore the pain he had caused. "And what about Mia?" she asked. "Are you planning to be part of her life or mine? Because you can't have both if it means keeping secrets." "I don't want to keep secrets anymore," he promised. "If you give me another chance, I'll find a way to balance both without hurting you." "I swear," Lina stood up, pacing the room as tears rolled down her cheeks. "I don't know if I can trust you, Alex. I don't know if I can ever believe anything you say again." He stood too, closing the distance between them. "Then let me earn your trust back," he whispered, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. "Please, Lina. Don't let this be the end of us." Her body trembled under his touch, torn between the love she still felt for him and the betrayal that had shattered her world. She searched his eyes for any sign of the man she'd fallen in love with, but all she saw was brokenness, his and her own. "I need time," she finally said, pulling away from him. "I can't make this decision right now." Alex nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I understand. I'll wait as long as you need." Without another word, he walked to the door and left, the sound of it closing behind him echoing through the empty house. Lina stood there for a long time, the silence pressing down on her. She had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain. She couldn't go back to the way things were. Whether she stayed or walked away, everything had changed. For now, she would take the time to rebuild herself, piece by piece, and maybe, just maybe, she would find the strength to choose the life she truly deserved. The days passed slowly, each one bleeding into the next as Lina tried to regain her sense of normalcy. But nothing felt normal anymore. The mornings were quieter, the nights colder. The absence of Alex's presence, once something she would have dreaded, now felt necessary, a strange combination of relief and longing she couldn't shake. She had asked for space, and he had respected it. No texts, no calls, no unexpected visits. It was as if he had disappeared, giving her the time she needed, but his ghost remained embedded in her heart. She spent her afternoons at the park, sitting on a bench with a notebook in her lap, scribbling down thoughts and feelings she couldn't say out loud. The pages were filled with anger, sorrow, and moments of clarity that came and went, like waves crashing against the shore. She wanted to forgive him, but every time she considered it, the image of Mia's face flashed before her eyes, and the betrayal came rushing back. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of amber and crimson, her phone buzzed. She hesitated before checking it, half expecting another message from Alex. But it wasn't him. It was Cara. "Drinks tonight? You need a break." Lina stared at the message for a moment, debating whether she had the energy to face the world. After a long breath, she replied, "Okay, see you at 8. She arrived at the bar just as the city lights began to flicker on, casting a golden glow over the streets. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses greeted her as she walked in, spotting Cara at a corner booth. Her best friend waved her over with a bright smile, but Lina could see the concern hidden behind it. "You made it," Cara said, pulling Lina into a hug. "I wasn't sure if you'd actually show up." "Neither was I," Lina admitted with a soft laugh, sliding into the booth. The warmth of the atmosphere wrapped around her, and for the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe without the weight of the past pressing down on her. They ordered drinks, and for a while, the conversation was light. Cara filled her in on work drama, a bad date she had recently been on, and the latest gossip among their mutual friends. Lina found herself laughing at Cara's animated storytelling, momentarily forgetting about the chaos waiting for her at home. But As the second round of drinks arrived, the conversation shifted. Cara leaned forward, her gaze softening. "How are you holding up?" Lina sighed, swirling the straw in her glass. "Some days are better than others. I feel like I'm stuck in limbo, not knowing if I should stay or leave." Cara nodded thoughtfully. "Do you still love him?" "Yes," Lina admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know if that's enough anymore. Love doesn't erase the lies. It doesn't fix the broken trust." "You're right," Cara agreed. "Love isn't enough by itself. But trust can be rebuilt if both people are willing to put in the work. The question is, do you think Alex is capable of that?" Lina thought back to their last conversation, the way he had looked at her, the sincerity in his voice when he begged her for another chance. "I think he wants to be," she said softly. "But I don't know if I can open myself up to that kind of pain again." Cara reached across the table, giving Lina's hand a reassuring squeeze. "Then take your time. You don't have to decide anything tonight or tomorrow. Heal at your own pace. But remember, you're not responsible for his happiness. You're responsible for yours." Those words hit Lina harder than she expected. For so long, she'd been consumed with making their marriage work, with being the perfect wife, that she had lost sight of herself. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, nodding at Cara's advice. After a few more hours of talking and laughter, Lina hugged Cara goodbye and made her way home. The walk back was peaceful, the cool night air brushing against her skin. She felt lighter, as though something inside her had shifted. For the first time, she wasn't consumed by the what-ifs or the guilt of leaving Alex behind. Instead, she allowed herself to think about what she wanted, what she deserved. When she reached her front door, she paused, looking up at the sky. The stars were scattered like tiny diamonds, shining brightly against the darkness. She closed her eyes, taking in the moment of calm before stepping inside. The house was just as quiet as it had been earlier, but it no longer felt suffocating. It felt like a space where she could rebuild. She made her way to the bedroom and sat on the bed, her gaze falling on the framed photo of her and Alex on their wedding day. They had looked so happy, so full of hope. Tears pricked her eyes, but she didn't look away. Instead, she picked up the photo and placed it face down on the nightstand. It wasn't a rejection of their past, but a recognition that she needed to let go of the illusion of perfection she had clung to for so long. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Alex. "I'm here if you ever want to talk." She stared at the message, her heart torn between the love she still felt and the hurt that hadn't yet healed. She didn't reply. Instead, she placed the phone on the nightstand and lay down, pulling the blanket over her. The decision didn't have to be made tonight, and that was okay. For now, she allowed herself to rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring new clarity, new strength, and maybe, just maybe, a new version of herself who could finally decide what kind of love was worth fighting for. The next morning, Lina awoke to the soft chirping of birds outside her window, their song mingling with the faint warmth of sunlight streaming through the blinds. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling as the events of the past week played like a slow, painful movie in her mind. But today, something felt different. There was no heaviness in her chest, no overwhelming ache, just a calm sense of acceptance, as though her heart had begun to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about moving forward. She got out of bed and headed to the kitchen, brewing herself a cup of coffee as the smell of roasted beans filled the room. She took her mug to the balcony, settling into a chair as she watched the world slowly come to life. A couple walked by, hand in hand, their laughter echoing down the street. A jogger passed, earbuds in, completely in his zone. Life was moving on, and Lina realized she wanted to move with it. Her phone vibrated beside her, and she hesitated before picking it up. It was another text from Alex. "I know I don't deserve it, but I hope you're okay. I miss you." She stared at the words for a long time, her fingers brushing lightly over the screen. The truth was, she missed him too. But missing him didn't erase the damage he had done. She couldn't go back to being the woman who ignored the signs or buried her feelings to keep the peace. If she ever gave him another chance, it would be on her terms. With a sigh, she set the phone aside and opened her laptop. She had been avoiding checking her emails, but now felt like the right time to face the world again. As she scrolled through messages, one subject line caught her attention. Job opening, marketing manager. Her heart skipped a beat. It was a role at a company she had admired for years, one she had dreamed of applying to but never did because of Alex's job and their life plans. But those plans didn't exist anymore, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the freedom to consider what she wanted. Before she could overthink it, she clicked on the email and began updating her resume. The act of typing out her accomplishments, seeing her potential laid out on paper, reignited a spark inside her. A reminder that she was more than a wife, more than someone defined by a relationship that had crumbled. She was capable of rebuilding her life. As she worked, time seemed to slip away, and by mid-afternoon, she had submitted her application. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply as a sense of accomplishment washed over her. It was a small step, but it was a step forward, and that was enough. Later that evening, Lina found herself standing in front of her mirror, brushing her hair as she prepared for another evening out with Cara. But tonight felt different. She wasn't going out to escape her problems. She was going out because she wanted to celebrate herself, to remind herself of the woman she was before her world had been turned upside down. As she grabbed her purse and headed toward the door, her phone buzzed again. It was Alex, but this time she didn't feel the same suffocating weight pressing down on her chest. She didn't feel the same pull of uncertainty. She read his message. "I'm willing to wait forever if that's what it takes." A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from sadness. It was from relief. Relief that she had finally reached a place where his words didn't control her. She typed a response, her fingers steady as she pressed send. "I need more time. But thank you for giving me that." As she walked out into the night, the cool breeze kissed her skin, and for the first time in days, she felt light, like she wasn't carrying the weight of betrayal and heartbreak anymore. She didn't know what her future held, whether Alex would be part of it or not, but she knew one thing for certain. She was finally finding herself again, and that was the greatest victory of all.